In today's episode, we are going to give you 5 quality questions to ask in your podcast interview. Welcome to Podcasting Q&A, where you learn the best tips and strategies to launch, grow, and monetize your show. In today's episode, we are talking all about how to craft a beautiful set of interview questions for your podcast guest. So when it comes to interviews, it can often feel like snagging the guest is the most intimidating part of the process. But once you've got the guest, what do you do? How do you make the most of that moment with them? You ask quality questions. So in today's episode, we are going to give you 5 amazing questions to help you maximize the time that you have with your podcast guest. For starters, let's talk about some do's and don'ts. First things first, it's common. You want to avoid asking close-end questions. Questions that start with did and do often yield you yes and no responses, which don't give you a lot of information. Instead, you want to ask questions that allow you to flow throughout the interview. So asking things like what happened, when, why, how, those will give you more things to work with as your guest answers your question. The second thing you want to avoid doing is asking the same question over and over again that they've been asked in different interviews. And if you must ask a question that's pretty common, try to find a different angle on it. So instead of asking, why did you become a blank? Ask, when was the moment that you knew you could not spend another moment of your life not being a blank? Slightly different angle, you might get a slightly different response, right? So you can reframe to sometimes get a different angle on a very commonly asked question. The next thing that you want to make sure that you do is listen. A lot of times when you're interviewing someone, your mind is caught up in the questions that you already have planned, but you're missing the moment. And in the moment, a question may come up just from natural conversation. So you want to stay plugged into the moment, listen, make sure that you're engaged, because sometimes some of the best questions come as a follow-up to something that your guest has said. So make sure that you're listening, ask open-ended questions, and reframe when possible. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about 5 examples of some beautifully crafted questions for your podcast interview. The first is tell me your story. Tell me your story is a really wonderful way to start off a podcast interview. It helps it's like a softball question. So the guest can introduce themselves, they can talk about what's important to them, and oftentimes it provides a nice little setup to flow organically in a conversation where a lot of your questions can just sort of be seamlessly placed. The other thing that I really like about this question is that oftentimes with your guest sharing about where they started, your listener can see themselves in your guest's story. And oftentimes that helps them see the guest as someone that's accessible, someone that's relatable, and they're much more open to receiving from your podcast guest. Question number 2, what do you wish you would have known before you started? It's kind of like a behind the scenes insider tip kind of question that you can ask your podcast guest, because a lot of times their hindsight can become your listener's foresight. And so as they share the things that they wish they would have known, your guest is hopefully being warned, informed, and hopefully being prevented from making the similar oversight or mistake that your podcast guest is sharing. Question number 3, tell me about a time when you failed and how you overcame that. This is also a really great question because failure is inevitable as much as we hate it, but it can also be really isolating and shaming. And so if your guest can tell a story about when they failed, it helps your listener know like, okay, when I fail, I'm not alone. It happens to everyone. This person that has achieved so much success has also failed. Okay, so this is just a part of the journey, and it can help your listener feel not so alone, but also pretty comforted that they're in good company. The other thing about this question, the how did they overcome it part, is really helpful too, because if your listener finds himself in a similar place as the guest shares, they are given this automatic insight into how to overcome and recover from the same mistake. Once again, high value nugget. Question number 4, what resources do you recommend? I love asking this question because hopefully this interview has been amazing, that my audience and my listeners have loved it and loved my guest. And so when they recommend a book, a podcast, or something that's influenced them and helped them become successful, amazing, insightful, the audience will get excited and go, oh, this has contributed to that mindset. How do I get more? And go look at those resources and recommendations. So again, adding value to the audience and to the listeners beyond just the interview. And question number 5, which isn't quite a structured question, but it's the art of the follow-up. So here's a little pro tip, and this is why it's important to stay in the moment. Oftentimes, some of the best follow-up questions come at the tail end of your guest's response. So questions like, why? Tell me more. What happened next? Are really great ways to dig for more than surface level answers. One of my favorite ways of doing this is mirroring. And mirroring is simply repeating what your guest said, but as a question. So for example, you followed him to the basement? What made you do that? It's a great way to dig beyond and get more of your guest's perspective, their reasoning, their rationale. And obviously, if you're asking that question, your audience is probably also asking that question. So again, providing that value and kind of anticipating what would people want to know. And so mirroring is a really great way to do that. At the end of the day, conducting a great interview isn't just about having a great guest. It's also about capitalizing and maximizing on the moments that you have with that guest. And asking really good questions is one of the best ways to do that. So now that you know how to ask great podcast interview questions, you might be wondering, where do I find those great guests that you mentioned? So glad that you asked. We actually have a video on the YouTube channel here called How to Land Great Podcast Guests. It's right over here. Check that out. It'll help you learn how to do just that. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, keep podcasting.